Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're cutting straight through the noise to focus on a really vital area of healthcare, how aging impacts the mind and, the senses. We are diving into a comprehensive stack of source material, Chapter 10 of Basic Geriatric Nursing, specifically focused on cognition and perception.
Yeah, this is such a critical chapter. It really tackles some of the biggest fears and, frankly, misconceptions people have about getting older. Our central theme today is basically understanding how people gain, interpret, and use information, and why that whole process becomes, well, uniquely challenging in later life.
Okay, so to set the stage, we need a couple of core definitions, right?
Exactly. First up is perception. Think of this as the ground level, the collection, interpretation, and recognition of stimuli. That includes everything from seeing and hearing to internal things like pain.
Gotcha. Collection, interpretation, recognition.
Right. And then cognition is sort of the next level up: intelligence, memory, language, making decisions. And here's the key thing. If that foundational perception, that input, is flawed,
Then the cognitive processing gets messed up too.
guaranteed, it really affects everything that follows.
Okay, so our mission today seems pretty clear. We need to arm you, the listener, with the knowledge to quickly tell the difference between, the expected normal changes that happen with age and the more serious problems that might be acute, even life-threatening. And then, crucially, what do we do about it? The intervention strategies. All right, let's unpack this, starting right at the source, the aging senses.
Yeah, you really can't overstate how tightly linked the central nervous system and the special senses are. Vision, hearing, touch. If an older adult's senses are compromised, their ability to make sense of the world is too. And that can easily look like confusion when it's actually a sensory issue.
And these sensory changes, well, they're pretty much guaranteed, aren't they? Looking at vision, the classic one is presbyopia.
Yep, that farsightedness. The lens loses elasticity.
Right. But it's more than just needing reading glasses. The source mentions decreased light responsiveness, so trouble with night vision, and cataracts, making things blurry, causing glare sensitivity, makes driving tough, or even just walking around.
And then there are neurological issues like hemianopsia. That's losing a part of your visual field, often after a stroke.
Which means we have to adapt the environment, right? Like put important stuff where they can actually see it.
Absolutely. Simple adjustments, big impact.
Okay, moving to hearing. The source material highlights three main things here.
Yeah, the big one is presbycusis. That's the age-related difficulty hearing higher-pitched sounds.
Which is why shouting doesn't usually help, right?
Exactly. It often makes it worse. Then there's otosclerosis, where sound just doesn't transmit as well through the ear bones. And of course, tinnitus, that persistent ringing or buzzing. The chapter lists signs to watch for, struggling with high-pitched voices, having a hard time when there's background noise, asking people to repeat themselves a lot. Pretty clear indicators.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. The brain starts to adapt. This idea of sensory compensation.
That's right. It's fascinating. When one sense gets weaker, the person naturally starts relying more on the others. Someone losing vision might tune in more acutely to sounds or textures.
The brain trying to fill in the blanks.
Basically, yeah. It's adapting.
Which brings us to a really critical nursing point from the source about pace. If the senses are slower, taking things in.
You absolutely have to give older adults enough time to process the question, time to formulate their answer. If you rush them,
The answer you get isn't reliable. It might just be them feeling pressured, not actually reflecting what they know or think.
precisely, it's that caution being mistaken for incompetence, which actually ties right into how we think about intelligence and aging.
Ah, yeah, the idea that intelligence doesn't just automatically drop off, it changes.
Exactly. The source makes this really useful distinction between two types. First, there's fluid intelligence.
Yeah, it's the think on your feet kind. Handling
Sure.
new situations, unfamiliar stuff.
Yeah.
That's what younger people tend to rely on more heavily, especially when learning something totally new. Contrast that with crystallized intelligence. This is more like wisdom. It's drawing on a lifetime of accumulated knowledge, experience, making judgments based on what you already know.
So older adults lean more on that crystallized intelligence.
Generally, yes. Which explains why sometimes they might seem slower on tasks that demand quick, novel problem-solving, the fluid stuff. It's not necessarily lack of ability, it's a different cognitive style, often more cautious, wanting to be certain.
So timed tests that heavily favor fluid intelligence. They might actually be penalizing older adults unfairly.
That's a really important point. Their crystallized intelligence, their wisdom, could be perfectly intact, maybe even better.
Okay, what about memory? That's a big concern for many people.
Right. The source notes that short-term memory is usually the one more affected with age compared to long-term memory. But here's something interesting they point out. A bit of forgetting what they call transience.
Losing memories you don't use much. Yeah, that's actually considered normal, healthy even. The brain's just being efficient, clearing out the clutter it doesn't need anymore.
Okay, but that sounds like a huge practical challenge for caregivers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do you tell that normal brain tidying apart from the start of, like, a real problem with short-term memory?
That's the tricky part. You look for the impact. Is it just minor stuff, like forgetting where you put your keys sometimes? Or is it consistently affecting daily function, routines, safety? That's when you worry. And when these sensory or cognitive issues get more severe, that's when we start seeing language problems too, like dysarthria.
Difficulty actually forming the words, muscle control issues.
Exactly, maybe after a stroke. And then there's aphasia or dysphagia, which is broader. That's trouble understanding language or expressing yourself using language, usually because of damage to the brain's language centers.
Okay, that feels like a natural bridge to what might be the most critical distinction in this whole chapter. Confusion.
hmm Confusion itself is just a broad term, disorientation to time, place, person, feeling bewildered, not able to think or act clearly. But the absolute first step before labeling someone as confused in a cognitive sense is to rule out those sensory issues we talked about, or an acute medical problem.
Right. Because there are two main types of confusion we see, and they are worlds apart. The chapter really emphasizes this.
Totally different. On one hand, you have delirium or acute confusion.
Acute meaning sudden onset.
Yeah, sudden, hours to days. And crucially, it's typically reversible. The person's attention is disturbed, their mood can swing wildly, sleep gets messed up, and it fluctuates a lot during the day. Lucid 1 minute, agitated the next.
And because it's acute, finding the cause is urgent.
Absolutely critical. It's often a sign of an underlying physiological problem. And the source gives us a fantastic tool for that investigation, the delirium mnemonic.
Okay, break that down for us. What does delirium stand for?
Sure. D is for drug use, especially watch out for anticholinergics like Benadryl, which can really cause problems in older adults. E is electrolyte imbalance. L is lack of drugs, think withdrawal.
Guy.
I is infection. UTIs, pneumonia are huge culprits, often presenting without the usual symptoms. R is reduced sensory input. I is intracranial problems like a stroke or bleed. U is urinary retention or fecal impaction. And M is myocardial problems, heart issues.
Wow, okay, so that mnemonic gives you a systematic way to hunt for the cause.
It really does. Follow that, and you've got a much better shot at finding and fixing the underlying issue.
Now contrast that, the rapid, reversible delirium, with the other side of the coin, dementia.
Right. Dementia is chronic confusion. It's slow, insidious onset. It's progressive, meaning it gets worse over time. And generally, it's irreversible. That's the tough reality.
And it's not just a normal part of aging, even though the risk goes up.
We have to keep stressing that. Dementia is caused by actual physical damage to the brain, the cerebral cortex. Think strokes, vascular issues, or Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common type. And as it progresses, caregivers need to be prepared for certain behaviors. Wandering, catastrophic reactions, those sudden, intense emotional outbursts and sundowning, where agitation and confusion get worse later in the day.
Okay, so we've laid out that sensory changes are common, even expected presbyopia, presbycusis, and the brain tries to compensate. But compensation only goes so far. Let's shift gears into action. What are the practical, hands-on things nurses and caregivers need to do when they know someone's sensory input is compromised?
Well, communication is absolutely paramount. If the patient has visual impairment, you have to say who you are when you enter the room and announce when you're leaving. Simple but vital.
And for hearing loss?
Approach so they can see your face. Maybe a gentle touch on the arm first to get their attention. Avoid startling them.
And the source had a really specific tip about voice tone for hearing loss.
Yes. This is so important and often counterintuitive. Use a low tone of voice. Remember, presbycusis usually affects the higher frequencies first. So, speaking lower, clearly, facing the person so they can potentially lip read, and using short, simple sentences, that's the way to go.
Makes sense. What about things like glasses and hearing aids?
Constant vigilance. Eyeglasses need to be clean, fit properly. Hearing aids, check the batteries often, clean the ear mold, check for wax buildup. The source even suggests storing spare batteries in the fridge to make them last longer.
Huh, interesting tip. And for that visual field loss, hemianopsia.
Environmental modification is key. Put their essential items called bell, water, phone on their good side, the side they can see, and teach them that sweeping technique, consciously turning their head side to side to scan the environment.
Okay, good practical stuff. Now, what about when we move beyond sensory issues to managing chronic confusion dementia? The goals shift, right?
Completely. With dementia, the primary goals are safety and maximizing function, helping the person stay as active and independent as possible, participating in their own activities of daily living or ADLs for as long as they can.
So what does that look like in practice, the interventions?
It starts with the environment. Keep it calm, safe, predictable. Reduce excessive noise and clutter. Structure and routine are incredibly important. Orientation is helpful, clocks, calendars, mentioning the day or time, but, and this is a huge point in the chapter, do not argue if the person is mistaken or becomes combative about reality.
Why not? Isn't correcting them helpful?
It almost always backfires. It just increases agitation and frustration. Their reality is different. Instead, use reflective statements. Focus on the feeling behind what they're saying, not the factual accuracy. Something like, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated right now, or I know this isn't where you want to be, but it's time for dinner. You have to validate the emotion. And because of the short-term memory loss, you'll need to repeat things often, calmly and patiently. Routine becomes their anchor.
Okay, that leads to the really sensitive topic of restraints. The source seems pretty strong on this.
Extremely strong. Avoid physical restraints, protective devices, and chemical restraints, like antipsychotic medications, whenever possible. They often increase confusion, agitation, risk of falls, and pressure injuries. They don't solve the underlying problem.
And there are serious warnings about those antipsychotics, right?
Yes, there's an FDA black box warning specifically about using them for dementia-related psychosis because studies showed an increased risk of death. There's a big push now, nationally, from organizations like CMS to reduce their use and focus on non-drug approaches first.
So, if not restraints or heavy meds, what do we use? Especially for those difficult behaviors like agitation or catastrophic reactions.
Distraction and redirection are your best friends. Simple, repetitive, calming tasks can work wonders: folding towels, sorting objects, looking at pictures, taking a walk, changing the environment. The chapter also mentions specific therapies, like light therapy, using special lights to help regulate sleep-wake cycles and reduce sundowning, and music therapy.
Ugh, music. That seems powerful.
Incredibly powerful. It taps into different parts of the brain, often parts less affected by dementia. It can improve mood, reduce anxiety, promote relaxation, and sometimes even briefly enhance cognition or recall memories. It's a fantastic person-centered tool.
Great alternatives. Okay, let's pivot one last time to another really important topic, pain.
Yes, and this is another area full of misconceptions. The chapter starts with a fundamental truth. Pain is not a normal part of growing old.
But older adults are at higher risk for conditions that cause pain.
Exactly. More chronic diseases, arthritis, neuropathies, but they often underreport pain. They might fear being seen as complaining, fear addiction to pain meds, or worry that admitting pain means they'll lose their independence.
So assessment becomes even more critical. Pain as the fifth vital sign. How do we assess it effectively, especially given potential communication barriers?
For the person who can communicate, the source recommends the PQRST mnemonic. It's a structured way to get the details.
Okay, what's PQRST?
P is for provocation, palliation, what makes it better or worse. Q is quality, what does it feel like? Sharp, dull, aching, burning. R is region radiation, where is it? Does it spread? S is severity, usually a 0 to 10 scale, or maybe FACES scale. And T is timing. When did it start? Is it constant, intermittent?
That's a solid framework.
Yeah.
But what about the patient who can't tell you? The person with advanced dementia?
That's where observational tools are essential. The chapter highlights the PAINAD scale pain assessment in advanced dementia. It's used internationally.
PAINAD, how did that work?
It looks at 5 specific behaviors you can observe. 1, breathing, is it labored, noisy? 2, negative vocalization, moaning, groaning, crying. 3, facial expression, frowning, grimacing. 4, body language, tense, rigid, fidgeting, guarding. And 5, consolability, can they be comforted, or do they remain distressed? You score each category, and a higher total score indicates more severe pain, even if they can't verbalize it.
That seems incredibly useful for non-verbal patients. And what about managing the pain once it's assessed?
Start simple. Comfort measures like repositioning, a back rub. Anticipate pain medicate before a painful procedure, not after they're already hurting. Use non-drug approaches too: heat, cold, distraction, imagery. And when giving medication, be timely. Give it before the pain gets severe. The source notes that nurses often underestimate pain in older adults. Giving meds on time, regularly for chronic pain, often means less medication is needed overall.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. Key takeaways from this deep dive into cognition and perception in geriatric nursing.
Well, first, those perceptual changes vision, hearing they're common, almost universal to some degree. So we absolutely must modify how we communicate low tone, face the person, and adapt the environment.
Second, know that crucial difference. Delirium is acute, sudden, usually reversible, and has an underlying physiological cause you need to find. Think delirium mnemonic.
Right. And dementia is slow, progressive, generally irreversible. Management there focuses on safety, structure, routine, maximizing function, and using non-drug approaches first for behavioral issues.
And finally, pain. It's not normal aging. Assess it thoroughly using the right tools, PQRST if they can talk, PAINAD if they can't, and treat it proactively.
Exactly.
All right, that leads us to our final provocative thought for you, our listener, to chew on. We know non-pharmacologic interventions, things like music therapy, light therapy, distraction, maintaining routine, are effective, often more effective and certainly safer than chemical restraints for managing behaviors in dementia. So the question is, what systemic changes, what organizational shifts do we as caregivers and healthcare professionals need to push for to make sure these person-centered approaches become the consistent standard of care, truly replacing outdated and potentially harmful methods?
Something important to think about.
Indeed. Thank you, the learner, for sharing this really vital source material from basic geriatric nursing for us to explore today. We really hope this deep dive leaves you feeling better informed and more confident in applying this knowledge in your practice.